on here? It seems to be broken still. In fact, let me go ahead and open another example rather than type this one out.
For many years, I taught a section for students who were less comfortable, and there was definitely some anxiety when we came into this point in the course. For some students, I think pointers can be really intimidating, and you hear the horror stories about how they can cause you to crash your program if you don't handle them correctly. And I think that this example is a really good way to just introduce why we need them and what they do.
I think so. And I don't know where it is that I sort of latched onto this as the entry point for our discussion of pointers, but I like how we introduce a pretty reasonable goal. Let's make a function that just swaps two values and see that it's broken, because all of a sudden it sort of shatters the abstraction that has been our discussion of functions and programming and what it can do, and you realize, wait a minute, this is not working as I expect it does, and we have to go lower level and actually see what's going on in the stack and what's going on ultimately with memory. And I think that's by far the most effective way to explain this. Don't hide the fact anymore that there is a whole stack going on. There's ultimately a heap as well, and there are indeed pointers via which we can manipulate those chunks of memory. Just show it to students and actually dive into that layer. And so this is indeed the sort of thing that I think many teachers stray away from C because of these lower level details. But I think this is where things really start to get interesting and starts to give us the vocabulary, so to speak, with which we can start building and stitching together some really interesting data structures.
Yeah, we can't start to have that conversation about what is a tree or really even an effective hash table or a linked list until we can get past this point in the course.
And I mean, Java at the end of the day, which many students experience in high school and APCS and so forth, I mean, it has references which are effectively allow us to do these kinds of things, but there's an abstraction there. There's a good defense mechanism built into them, which was certainly by design. But now, I mean, we are really getting as close to the computer's RAM or virtual memory as we can by just using these lower level primitives.
I remember this being a turning point for me as a student in CS50 when it finally sort of clicked for me because it does really give you the power to get beyond the lower level stuff. And granted, we're still in a low level language, but you can get into a slightly higher higher point.
And I forgot to do it this year. Last year, you recall, we had someone come up on stage and she did the little switcheroo with the milk and the water, milk and orange juice, which are color, which actually, as an aside, you're not going to see it here in this particular year, but we use milk and orange juice because, one, it's so colorfully different, but also because then I can kind of sort of get away with using oil as a fake substitute for orange juice, and then you can do a switcheroo that just magically works, much like the XOR trick, with which some of you might be familiar, via which you can indeed swap two variables without the need for a temporary storage variable, which is to say, can't offer it to you in this year's CS50, but there's a really good example in 2015's wherein we use that as part of this demonstration. Still doesn't address the fundamental problem at hand, which is that swap does not work as intended here, and that's why we have to introduce now the syntax with which to declare these things as pointers. And this, I will admit, this is my biggest regret with the design of C syntactically, is that the star or asterisk operator was used both to declare a pointer, but also to dereference it.
Yeah.
Because it's such a subtlety, and I try to emphasize to students that when the star comes immediately after a type and is immediately prefixing a variable, that is declaring the pointer, but if there's no mention of that type later when you see the star, it is dereferencing it. I mean, not to mention that star is also used for multiplication, so I don't know what I would have picked otherwise, but that conceptual difference.
It's a hang-up. It's a real hang-up, I think. It just adds to the, not allure, but the drama, I think, that can sometimes surround pointers. Is just, it's silly little things like this, the syntax trip-ups that, once you get your head around this concept, yeah, it's not that strange, but that is just an unnecessary obstacle built into the language, I think, to get there.
I will say a perk of CS50 IDE this year and the debugger that's now built in, thanks to Dan and Kareem and others, is the fact that you can now see these changes happening in real time. In the past, if I were to use the command line version of GDB, it's not all that enlightening to be showing the code here, then have to run the program and then hit print or display the value of some variable. Just seeing it in real time, I think, is pretty powerful. Not to mention having the big highlight over the line of code in which you're in, you can really see the state that's being changed. Not to mention the fact that the debugger also shows you the call stack, so you can see very clearly you're inside of swap's frame, not inside of main.
And main is just kind of waiting for you to finish your work.
Exactly. So a lot of, I think, features this year have come together to hopefully paint a much clearer picture as to what's going on and what isn't going on underneath the hood here.
Now A is about to become B.